By the mid-1800s, steam power had become economically feasible in the United States, and was beginning to take the nation by storm. Hundreds of railroads popped up across the country, many in Massachusetts. Rail lines began springing up everywhere, and there was little legislation regarding their discontinuation. This meant that many companies would build a passenger or freight line, operate it for several years, decide that the line was not profitable enough, and then abandon the line. To solve this problem, legislation was passed in 1865 requiring that railroad companies could not reduce service to long-established stations without permission of the Commonwealth. This was the beginning of the notion that railroad companies had a duty to the public. Still, even as late as 1872, all that was required to start a railroad company in Massachusetts was 25 people and permission of the Board of Railroad Commissioners. Once a railroad company was established, it had the power of eminent domain to take property for track and stations. This resulted in a number of superfluous railroads being constructed, which were not popular with the public. For this reason, in 1882, the laws regarding new railroad construction were amended to require that the railroad company prove that their proposed line was useful and served a public need. Construction of new rail lines slowed, but at this point the state was so full of rail lines that the slow was more likely due to a lack of places to build, rather than the increased legislative hurdles. In 1920, after several iterations of state regulations, the federal government got involved with the passing of the Federal Transportation Act. This legislation stated that all new rail line proposals must be approved by the Interstate Commerce Commission. Although the stated purpose of this legislation was to prevent overcrowding of rail lines, it was clear at the time that the new law was a product of fear amongst larger interstate railroads that smaller lines were going to put them at financial risk. Up until the early 20s, very few rail lines had been abandoned in Massachusetts, mostly because closing a line required special permission from the state legislature. However, because the Federal Transportation Act gave that power to the federal government, companies began closing unprofitable lines with permission from the Interstate Commerce Commission. By 1957, as more and more lines were discontinued, the Commonwealth tried to take this power back by introducing a law that prohibited a rail line that had run continuously for 12 months from being closed, without special permission from the Department of Public Utilities. Rail companies did not take kindly to the state circumventing the federal law, and so they complained to Congress, and the Transportation Act of 1958 was passed. This new law gave the Interstate Commerce Commission final say over rail line discontinuance. The railroad companies still applied for permission from the state, but they could appeal to the ICC if the state rejected them. In 1964, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority was given regulatory authority over all passenger rail service in its district, but by then, much of the state's rail infrastructure had been abandoned with approval of the ICC. The first time the Commonwealth of Massachusetts became involved in the operational aspects of commuter lines was in 1970, when Boston and Maine Railroad, who operated several of the North Station commuter lines, filed for bankruptcy. The vast majority of B&M's assets were transferred to the Commonwealth, but B&M continued to operate these lines through a contract with the MBTA. The primary operator of the South Station commuter lines, Penn Central Transportation Company, also filed for bankruptcy in 1970. The Commonwealth acquired almost all of its assets as well. By 1981, B&M was operating both the north and south side lines and was struggling to make a profit. B&M restructured as Guilford Transportation Industries and let the contract to operate the MBTA commuter rail expire in 1986. After GTI's contract expired, the MBTA reached a deal with Amtrak to operate all commuter lines. Amtrak and the MBTA had strained relations from the beginning, centering mostly around which agency was to take the blame for late trains. In December of 1990, the Back Bay train collision occurred. Amtrak's Night Owl collided with a regularly scheduled commuter rail train just outside Back Bay Station. Although no one was killed, there were over 250 injuries, some of which were severe. The incident also destroyed one of the MBTA's F-40 locomotives and caused about $14 million in damage. This further deteriorated the relationship between Amtrak and the MBTA. Due to a number of other problems and disagreements between the two parties, Amtrak did not bid to renew its contract in 2003. Throughout the time it was operated by B&M and Amtrak, the MBTA acquired a variety of equipment for the commuter rail. In In 1979, the MBTA purchased a number of Comet coaches to replace the aging coaches and rail diesel cars, or RDCs, many of which had been in operation since the 1940s. In order to replace the aging locomotives it had acquired from the bankrupt railroads, the MBTA purchased and refurbished 40 F40PHs and 25 GP40MCs. In the 1990s, the MBTA contracted Kawasaki to build 75 bi-level coaches. All of this equipment, with the exception of some locomotives and coaches that have been decommissioned or scrapped for various reasons, are still in service. The Comet cars, many of which now exceed 40 years in age, are still the primary coach for the North Side fleet. From 2003 to 2013, the commuter rail was operated by the Massachusetts Bay Commuter Railroad Company, or MBCR. This was a time of great modernization and expansion for the commuter rail. Throughout this time, the MBTA upgraded service substantially, including updating the signaling systems on many lines as well as beginning to implement positive train control, a technology that increases safety by allowing the position of each train to be monitored from a central control area. The MBTA also shifted its focus to include non-commuter riders by introducing a Cape Flyer train that transports passengers from Boston to Cape Cod on weekends. It was also during this time that the first commuter rail line was electrified, although this is only used by Amtrak trains, as the MBTA has no non-diesel locomotives in its fleet. In 2013, the MBTA signed a $222 million contract with Motive Power Industries to design and build 40 new diesel-electric locomotives. These locomotives, called the HSP-46, are unique to the MBTA. The goal of this purchase was to increase reliability and help to modernize the fleet. Unfortunately, these locomotives began having problems almost immediately. The traction motor bearings in all of these locomotives were faulty, and ultimately each locomotive had to be sent back to MPI for warranty repairs, meaning that it has been a struggle to get these locomotives into a position where they can be reliable replacements for the existing locomotive fleet. It was also at this time that the MBTA purchased 75 new bi-level cars from Hyundai Rotem, and in 2019 the MBTA signed a $285 million contract with Hyundai Rotem for another 80 bi-level coaches. These are expected to begin delivery in 2022. Currently, the commuter rail is operated by Keolis, a French company that specializes in transportation operation and maintenance. At this point, the commuter rail services 141 stations on 398 miles of track. The current-day commuter rail is surprisingly similar to what it looked like in the 1990s. Despite the addition of a number of stations, as well as extensions of some lines, the commuter rail still provides the same service using the same equipment that it has for many decades. This is a point of contention for many groups and individuals who want to see a more modernized, efficient rail system that is designed with the modern passenger in mind. One of the largest complaints about the current system is the amount of time between each train. Many are looking to other cities in the United States, as well as internationally, who have trains every 5 to 7 minutes, compared to the MBTA's 30-minute average. That being said, the MBTA has begun experimenting with clock-face scheduling on some lines. This is where trains run on intervals, such as a train every 30 minutes, rather than adhering to a schedule with specific timing where at some times during the day trains are 15 minutes apart, and at other times there are hours in between each trip. Another common concern about the commuter rail is its aging equipment. The MBTA still operates heavy rail equipment, much of which was built in the 1970s. However, in addition to investing in new equipment, the MBTA is beginning to look at electrification. They currently plan to begin testing electric locomotives in 2024, but do not plan to heavily invest in the initiative until after 2027. Prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the future of the commuter rail looked very promising. Ridership was climbing steadily, and so was the timeliness of trains. However, with the massive drop in ridership caused by the pandemic, it is unclear if the commuter rail will continue to receive the same attention and funding that it had been. That being said, all of the initiatives to modernize and improve the commuter rail are still underway, and all signs point to a renewed effort to upgrade and adapt the MBTA commuter rail to the current day.